Welcome, the anointed ones. If you knew what they really tried to do to you, if you could see the spiritual blueprint they drew up in the darkness, you'd understand why your composure during that disgusting situation wasn't just impressive. It was supernatural. This is not a coincidence that you're hearing this right now. While most people were sleeping, while the world was distracted by noise and chaos, something ancient and calculated was set in motion against you. They thought they had you cornered. They believed that this time you would finally break. But what if I told you that everything they taught you about power was a lie? What if I told you that your refusal to retaliate wasn't weakness, it was warfare on a level they couldn't even comprehend? See, Chosen One, there are forces in this world that feed on reaction. They thrive on chaos, on broken spirits, on people who snap under pressure and give them exactly what they're hungry for. But you did something that made the kingdom of darkness take notice. You did something that had angels whispering your name in realms you can't see. You didn't just survive that disgusting situation, you transcended it. And now people are watching you with a mixture of awe and terror, because they're starting to realize they were in the presence of something they couldn't control, couldn't break, couldn't corrupt. For 50 years, I've been watching God's chosen navigate spiritual warfare. I've seen the attacks, the setups, the carefully orchestrated humiliations designed to make holy people question their calling. But what happened to you? What you did in response? It's being talked about in heavenly places right now. Thank you to every single one of you who has supported this message through super thanks. Your generosity means more than you know. You're not just donating, you're helping spread light to others who feel alone in their calling. Whether you give or not, I'm deeply grateful for your presence here, your support, your time, your attention. It all matters. And if this message resonates with your soul, go ahead and plant that seed of faith. But here's what they don't want you to know about that situation you walked through. Here's the part that's being covered up, whispered about, feared by those who orchestrated it. Your silence wasn't submission. Your restraint wasn't retreat. Your grace under fire wasn't human. It was divine intelligence operating through a vessel they never saw coming. And what happened next? What's happening to them right now, as a direct result of how you handled their attack, made the darkness tremble. Stay with me, Chosen One, because what I'm about to reveal will explain why you felt that supernatural strength when you should have crumbled. Why peace flooded your spirit when chaos was all around you. And why the very people who tried to destroy you are now watching you rise with something that looks suspiciously like respect. This story, your story, it's about to become their nightmare. Chapter 1. They laid a trap. You walked through it unstained. They thought they had you figured out. They studied your patterns, your reactions, your breaking points. They sat in their little circles, whispering strategies, plotting the perfect storm designed to shatter your reputation and crush your spirit in front of everyone who ever believed in you. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly known, that you weren't walking into their trap. You were walking through it. And there's a difference that made all the difference in the world. See, Chosen One, they built their scheme like architects of destruction. Every lie was a brick. Every whispered rumor was mortar. Every betrayal was a carefully placed beam designed to collapse the moment you stepped inside. They wanted you humiliated, broken, begging for mercy that would never come. They needed you to explode, to lose control, to give them the reaction that would justify everything they'd been saying about you behind closed doors. But you did something that stopped hell in its tracks. You walked through their trap like it was made of smoke. You didn't dodge it. You didn't run from it. You didn't even acknowledge it was there. You just walked through, clean, unbothered, unstained. And that's when they realized they weren't dealing with who they thought they were dealing with. You see, they expected human reactions because they operate with human limitations. They expected anger because that's what they would have felt. They expected defense because that's what guilty people do. They expected you to fight fire with fire because that's the only language they speak. But you didn't fight fire with fire. You transcended the battlefield entirely. You operated on a frequency so high that their low vibration attacks couldn't even reach you. And that's when the first crack appeared in their confidence. They watched you move through their carefully constructed chaos with the kind of peace that can only come from divine backing. While they were busy stirring the pot, you were busy being still. While they were manufacturing drama, you were demonstrating something they'd never seen before, what it looks like when someone knows who they are at a soul level, what it looks like when someone's identity isn't dependent on other people's opinions, what it looks like when you're walking in such alignment with purpose that the storms around you can't shake what's inside you. You didn't fall in the dirt, you embarrassed it by walking through clean. But here's what really shook them to their core. Your restraint wasn't weakness, it was warfare. Every time they expected you to snap and you didn't, you were dismantling their entire strategy. Every moment you stayed calm while they lost their minds, you were proving that their power was an illusion. Every second you remained dignified while they revealed their true nature. You were winning a battle they didn't even know they were fighting, because you understood something they never learned. Real power doesn't scream. It doesn't have to defend itself. It doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Real power is so confident in its truth that it can afford to be misunderstood. Real power can walk through hell and come out humming. And that's exactly what you did. You turned their trap into your testimony. You turned their attack into your platform. You turned their scheme into your strength. They thought they were writing your obituary, but you were writing your origin story. They thought they were ending your chapter, but you were beginning your legend. The most beautiful part? You didn't even have to lift a finger. Your presence was your weapon. Your peace was your protest. Your silence was your sermon. While they were busy talking, you were busy being. And being, chosen one, is always more powerful than seeming. They wanted to see you beg. They got to see you blessed. They wanted to see you break. They got to see you break through. They wanted to see you bitter. They got to see you better. And now they're sitting in the ruins of their own trap, wondering how someone they thought they had measured could be so immeasurable. You didn't just survive their setup. You sanctified it. You took their evil intentions and turned them into something holy. You took their curse and converted it into your calling. You took their weapon and turned it into your worship. And the most powerful part of all? You did it without compromising a single piece of who you are. You didn't become like them to beat them. You stayed like you to defeat them. You proved that light doesn't overcome darkness by becoming darkness. Light overcomes darkness by being so brilliantly, unapologetically, undeniably light that darkness has no choice but to retreat. They laid a trap for you, chosen one. But what they caught was a glimpse of the divine. What they snared was their own defeat. What they trapped was their own lies. Because you can't trap someone who was never in a cage to begin with. You can't break someone who's already been rebuilt by the Master. You can't stain someone who's been washed clean by grace. They thought they were dealing with just another person. They found out they were dealing with a chosen vessel. They thought they were writing your ending. They discovered they were witnessing your beginning. They thought they had you cornered. They learned that you don't have corners. You have endless dimensions of depth, strength, and purpose that they'll never reach, never touch, never understand. You walk through their trap unstained, chosen one. And in doing so, you didn't just escape their plan. You exposed their hearts. You didn't just avoid their pit. You revealed their emptiness. You didn't just sidestep their scheme. You showed the world what real power looks like when it's backed by something bigger than human ego. And now they know. Now they all know. They weren't dealing with someone they could break. They were dealing with someone who was already unbreakable. Someone who had been through fires they couldn't imagine and come out refined, not ruined. Someone who carried a strength they couldn't steal, a peace they couldn't disturb, and a purpose they couldn't touch. You walked through their trap unstained, and in the process, you stained their reputation with the truth of who they really are. Chapter 2. You starved the demons without saying a word. They thought noise would drive you to madness. They thought if they made enough chaos, stirred enough lies, created enough confusion around your name, you'd eventually snap. You'd eventually give them the reaction they were starving for. But what they didn't understand, chosen one, is that you weren't operating on their frequency anymore. You had learned something in the silence of your wilderness seasons. Something they couldn't Google, couldn't study, couldn't replicate. You had learned that demons don't just feed on fear, they feed on attention. They feast on reaction. They grow fat on response. And you decided to starve them. While they whispered poison in corners, you whispered prayers in secret places. While they gathered in groups to discuss your destruction, you gathered yourself in solitude to find your strength. They threw bait. You threw it back to heaven. They screamed accusations. You answered with stillness so profound it echoed in realms they couldn't access. See, chosen one, they were expecting war. They had their weapons ready. Lies, manipulation, character assassination, public humiliation. They were dressed for battle, armed with gossip and loaded with malice. But you showed up to their battlefield with something they'd never encountered before. Divine silence, holy restraint, supernatural composure. You didn't swing at shadows. You made them swing at nothing until they disappeared. That's what broke them. Not your words, not your defense, not your counterattack. Your absolute, unwavering refusal to participate in their circus. You wouldn't take the bait. You wouldn't enter their arena. You wouldn't give their demons the meal they were desperately craving. And oh, how they withered. You see, darkness can only survive when it has something to push against. Evil only thrives when it has good to corrupt, light to extinguish, peace to shatter. But when you removed yourself from their equation, when you stopped feeding their chaos with your energy, they found themselves fighting air, screaming into voids, throwing punches at phantoms. They had built their entire strategy around your reaction. They needed you angry. They needed you defensive. They needed you loud, messy, emotional, unhinged. Because that would have validated every lie they told about you. That would have given them permission to point fingers and say, "See, we told you who they really were." But you denied them that satisfaction. While they performed their hatred on public stages, you practiced your holiness in private chambers. While they exhausted themselves trying to tear you down, you conserved your energy and built yourself up. While they spent their nights plotting your downfall, you spent your nights plotting your comeback, not through revenge, but through resurrection. Your silence became their nightmare. Because in that silence, all their noise sounded exactly like what it was: empty, desperate, pathetic. Without your voice to argue against, their accusations lost all power. Without your emotions to exploit, their manipulation fell flat. Without your participation, their drama became a one-person show that nobody wanted to watch. You turned their weapon against them. They used silence to try to isolate you, to make you feel alone and abandoned. But you transformed that same silence into a fortress, a sanctuary, a place where their voices couldn't reach, their poison couldn't penetrate, their chaos couldn't contaminate. And in that holy quiet, something magnificent happened. You heard the voice that had been drowned out by all their noise. The voice that had been calling your name long before they knew you existed. The voice that whispered truths about your identity that no human mouth could speak and no human ear could silence. You remembered who you were. Not who they said you were. Not who they needed you to be for their narrative to work. But who heaven called you before the foundation of the world was laid. That's when the demons started starving. Because demons can't survive in the presence of someone who knows their true identity. They can't feast on someone who refuses to question their worth based on the opinions of the unworthy. They can't drain energy from someone who has learned to be filled from a source they can't access, can't block, can't corrupt. Your silence wasn't passive. It was precision warfare. Every word you didn't speak was a sword in the spirit. Every response you didn't give was a shield protecting your sanity. Every explanation you didn't offer was a declaration that your truth didn't need their validation to be valid. They threw stones. You built cathedrals. They spread poison. You planted gardens. They created noise. You created space. Space for healing. Space for growth. Space for the miraculous to unfold without their interference. And now, as the dust settles and the smoke clears, they're left standing in the ruins of their own making. Their lies have no legs to stand on. Their gossip has no substance to sustain it. Their hatred has no target to hit, because you rose above their reach. You didn't just survive their attack. You transcended their battlefield entirely. You didn't play their game. You changed the rules. You didn't fight fire with fire. You fought fire with water, the living water that flows from a spirit connected to its source. The demons they sent to destroy you went back empty-handed, malnourished, defeated. Not because you overpowered them, but because you underfed them. You starved them of the very thing they needed to survive your reaction, your emotion, your attention, your energy. And in that starvation, they discovered something terrifying. You weren't who they thought you were. You weren't just another person they could break with pressure and manipulation. You were someone who had learned to draw strength from silence, power from peace, victory from refusing to participate in their version of war. You didn't swing at shadows, chosen one. You made them swing at nothing until they disappeared. And that is the kind of warfare that makes darkness tremble and heaven take notice. Your silence spoke louder than their screams. Your stillness moved more than their chaos. Your peace conquered more territory than their warfare ever could. Because you understood something they never will, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who doesn't need to prove their power. They just embody it, quietly, confidently, completely. Chapter 3. They expected you to break, but you became the blueprint. They thought the storm would swallow you, but you were the storm in disguise. Let me tell you what they never saw coming. Chosen one, they gathered their weapons of words, sharpened their tongues like swords, and positioned themselves like generals planning the final assault on your spirit. They had spreadsheets of your weaknesses, notebooks filled with your past mistakes, and conference calls about how to deliver the killing blow to your reputation. They were so confident, so certain that this time you would finally shatter like glass hitting concrete. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't calculate in all their scheming, is that glass under extreme pressure doesn't just break. Sometimes it becomes diamond. You didn't just survive their attack. You became the blueprint for how divine strength operates through human flesh. While they expected tears, you gave them composure. While they anticipated breakdown, you delivered breakthrough. They thought they were watching the end of your story, but they were actually witnessing the birth of your legend. See, they made a fundamental mistake. They confused your kindness for weakness, your silence for submission, your patience for passivity. They thought because you didn't retaliate immediately, you were defenseless. They assumed because you didn't fight fire with fire, you had no fire at all. But what they discovered, to their absolute terror, is that you weren't fighting on their level because you were operating from a frequency they couldn't even access. You didn't fight fire with fire, you transcended the battlefield entirely. While they were down in the mud, wrestling with demons they had invited into their own hearts, you were walking on higher ground. You understood something they never could. The most powerful response to darkness isn't more darkness. It's an unshakable light that refuses to be dimmed. You became that light, chosen one, not by trying to outshine them, but by simply refusing to let their shadows define your glow. They expected panic. You gave them peace. They expected rage. You gave them grace. They expected you to match their energy, to descend into their chaos, to prove you were just as capable of playing dirty as they were. But you did something that made the angels take notes and the demons take cover. You stayed clean in the mud. You remained holy in the horror. You kept your soul intact while everything around you was designed to corrupt it. That's not human strength, beloved. That's divine DNA, activating under pressure. They thought fear would break you. It backfired. Fear broke itself against your faith. Every whispered lie they spread about you, every door they tried to close, every relationship they attempted to poison, it all backfired with the precision of divine justice. Because when God has called someone, when heaven has marked them as chosen, the very weapons formed against them become the tools of their elevation. You see, they never understood the spiritual mathematics of your situation. They thought if they added enough pressure, multiplied enough pain, and divided enough support, they could reduce you to nothing. But they forgot one crucial element in the equation. When God is your factor, the mathematics change entirely. Pressure plus purpose doesn't equal breakdown. It equals breakthrough. Pain plus calling doesn't equal defeat. It equals destiny. Division plus divine favor doesn't equal isolation. It equals elevation. You became living proof that the chosen don't crumble under pressure, they crystallize. Every attack they launched didn't weaken your foundation. It revealed how unshakable that foundation really was. They threw everything they had at the walls of your character, and those walls didn't just stand, they started glowing. You didn't fall. You rose. You didn't run. You stood. You didn't flinch. You smiled. And that smile, chosen one, that calm, knowing, peaceful smile you wore while they raged around you, that smile haunts them still, because it told them everything they needed to know about who they were really dealing with. They weren't just attacking a person. They were coming against someone who had been battle-tested in fires they couldn't imagine, someone who had been trained in the school of suffering and graduated with honors in the art of divine resilience. Your smile said what your words never needed to. I know something you don't know. I carry something you can't touch. I'm protected by something you can't see. They expected you to beg for mercy. Instead, you became mercy calm, steady, immovable mercy that exposed their desperation for exactly what it was. But here's the part that terrifies them most, the revelation that keeps them awake at night, wondering what kind of person they really tried to destroy. You didn't just survive their disgusting situation. You transformed it. You took their weapon of destruction and turned it into your platform of construction. Every lie they told about you became a testament to your truth. Every door they closed became a window to something better. Every relationship they tried to destroy became space for connections that actually deserved your presence. You became the mirror that showed them exactly who they were, and they couldn't stand the reflection. While they were busy trying to dirty your name, your character was being refined like gold in fire. While they were spreading poison, you were developing immunity. While they were plotting your downfall, heaven was orchestrating your rise. They thought they were writing your obituary, but they were actually writing your origin story. You are not just a survivor, chosen one. You are the blueprint, the template, the living proof that divine DNA doesn't just endure, it prevails. You showed a watching world what it looks like when heaven's training meets hell's testing, and heaven wins every single time. They thought the storm would swallow you. But you were the storm in disguise, not the destructive kind that tears down, but the cleansing kind that washes away everything false and leaves only what's real standing. And what's left standing is you, unbroken, unbowed, undeniably chosen. The storm has passed. The blueprint is complete. And they're still trying to figure out how someone they were so sure they could destroy became the very definition of indestructible. That's the power of being chosen, beloved. That's what happens when divine training meets earthly testing. You don't just survive. You become the standard. Chapter 4. You held the mirror, and they saw their monster. They thought they could hide behind their masks forever. They believed their carefully crafted personas would shield them from accountability. But then you walked into their world, chosen one, and everything changed. Not because you came with accusations or exposés. Not because you brought receipts or called them out publicly. You came with something far more dangerous than words. You came with truth. And truth, beloved, doesn't need a microphone to be heard. You became the mirror they were terrified to look into. See, mirrors don't lie. They don't embellish. They don't sugarcoat or make excuses. They simply reflect what is. And when you stood in your peace, when you carried yourself with that quiet dignity they couldn't understand, you held up a reflection of everything they were desperately trying to hide. Their chaos, their dysfunction, their spiritual poverty, their emotional bankruptcy. All of it came into sharp, undeniable focus the moment they stood next to your stillness. You didn't have to say a word. Your presence spoke volumes. While they were busy spinning narratives, crafting lies, and building elaborate storylines to justify their behavior, you did something that shattered their entire defense system. You simply existed, authentically, peacefully, genuinely. And that authentic existence became a standard they couldn't measure up to. A light that exposed every shadow they were hiding in. They thought they were clever. They thought their games were sophisticated, their manipulations subtle, their schemes invisible. But the moment you entered their space with your unshakable foundation, their house of cards began to tremble. Not because you pushed it, because real stability exposes artificial structure. True peace reveals manufactured chaos. Genuine strength highlights performed power. You didn't expose them. Their own reflection in your silence did. Listen to me carefully, chosen one. What happened in that moment wasn't just social dynamics. It wasn't just personality clashes or misunderstandings. It was spiritual warfare at its most profound level. You were carrying something they couldn't access, couldn't replicate, and couldn't destroy. A frequency so pure, so aligned, so divinely ordered that it acted like spiritual acid on everything fake in their presence. They saw themselves clearly for the first time in years, and they hated what they saw. The lies they told themselves about who they were shattered. The justifications they built for their toxic behavior crumbled. The false confidence they wore like armor stripped away. Standing next to your authentic power, their artificial power looked pathetic. Next to your genuine peace, their manufactured drama looked desperate. Next to your real strength, their performed toughness looked like what it was, weakness masquerading as might. You held up a mirror, and they saw their monster. But here's what made it even more devastating for them, chosen one. You weren't trying to humble them. You weren't attempting to make them feel small or exposed. You were just being yourself, and that's what made their reflection so unbearable. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't intentional. It was simply true. Your kindness highlighted their cruelty. Your patience exposed their impatience. Your wisdom revealed their foolishness. Your maturity showed their childishness. Your spiritual depth made their spiritual shallowness obvious to everyone in the room, including themselves. They couldn't attack the mirror without admitting what they saw in it was real. So they did what people always do when confronted with truth they can't handle. They tried to break the mirror. They attempted to destroy the reflection by destroying the one reflecting it. They launched campaigns against your character, spread lies about your motives, questioned your integrity. Because if they could discredit the mirror, they wouldn't have to deal with what it revealed. But mirrors don't break when you attack them with lies. They just keep reflecting truth. And that's when their real panic set in. Because every attempt to destroy your image only made their own reflection clearer. Every lie they told about you exposed more truth about them. Every attack they launched bounced back and revealed the very character flaws they were trying to hide. They became their own worst enemy. exposing themselves while trying to expose you. You just stood there, peaceful, unbothered, reflecting. The beauty of divine justice, beloved, is that it doesn't require your participation. You don't have to defend yourself when God is your defense. You don't have to expose them when their own behavior is doing the exposing. You don't have to fight when your very existence is the victory. They looked into the mirror of your character and saw everything they weren't. They saw the person they could have been if they had made different choices. They saw the peace they had traded for chaos, the authenticity they had sacrificed for acceptance, the integrity they had sold for temporary advantage. And it broke them, not because you broke them, because the truth broke them. The mirror didn't create their flaws. It simply revealed what was already there: the dysfunction, the manipulation, the spiritual emptiness, the emotional immaturity. All of it had been hidden under layers of performance. But your presence stripped away the costume and revealed the reality underneath. You became the conscience they had silenced, speaking without words. This is why your presence made them so uncomfortable, chosen one. It wasn't personal animosity. It was spiritual conviction. You represented everything they had walked away from: integrity, authenticity, peace, purpose. Standing next to you, they remembered who they used to be before they chose the path of compromise, manipulation, and spiritual shortcuts. Some people can't stand to be reminded of their potential. Some people can't bear to see what they could have become. Some people would rather destroy the mirror than face what it shows them. But you're not responsible for their discomfort with truth. You're not accountable for their inability to face themselves. You're not obligated to dim your light so their darkness feels comfortable. You held the mirror steady, and what they saw there, that's between them and God. The profound truth they couldn't escape was this: everything they hated about you was actually everything they hated about themselves. Your peace reminded them of the chaos they had chosen. Your stability highlighted their emotional instability. Your authenticity exposed their performed personalities. Your spiritual maturity revealed their spiritual arrested development. You didn't judge them. The truth judged them. And truth, beloved, is not negotiable. So when they reacted with rage, with lies, with desperate attempts to tear you down, they weren't really fighting you. They were fighting their own reflection. They were at war with the version of themselves that your presence revealed. The version that had compromised, that had chosen shortcuts, that had traded character for convenience. You just held the mirror steady while they fought their own image. And that, chosen one, is why your silence was more powerful than any words could have been. That's why your peace was more devastating than any argument. That's why your presence alone was enough to unravel their entire false narrative. Because mirrors don't argue, they just reflect. And what they reflected back to these people was a truth they couldn't deny, couldn't escape, and couldn't destroy. You held the mirror. They saw their monster, and the whole world watched them react to their own reflection. Chapter 5. The dirt didn't stick because you were sealed in light. They threw everything they had at you. Every lie, every accusation, every piece of filth they could scrape from the bottom of their hearts. They hurled it with such vicious intention, such calculated malice, believing that this time, something would finally stick to you. Something would finally stain the reputation they couldn't stand to see shine so bright. But here's what happened that left them speechless. Chosen one. Here's what made their jaws drop and their schemes crumble into dust. The dirt didn't stick. Not because you ducked, not because you ran, not because you hid behind lawyers or public relations teams or carefully crafted social media posts. The dirt didn't stick because you were sealed. Sealed in something they couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't penetrate no matter how hard they tried. You see, what they didn't understand, what they still don't understand, is that when God sets his hand upon someone, When heaven places its mark on a chosen vessel, there's an invisible coating that covers that person. It's not visible to the naked eye, but it's more real than anything you can touch with your hands. You were walking around wearing divine armor, and you didn't even know it. While they were busy mixing their poison, crafting their lies, sharpening their tongues like swords, you were already protected by something ancient and unbreakable. Every word they spoke against you, every rumor they spread, every character assassination they attempted it, hit an invisible wall and fell to the ground like dead leaves. They couldn't understand why their usual tactics weren't working, why the mud they were slinging wasn't finding its target, why their lies seemed to lose power the moment they left their lips. They kept throwing harder, speaking louder, trying to recruit more people to their cause, but nothing could penetrate the seal that had been placed over your life. You weren't untouched because it wasn't real. You were untouched because you were covered. And the beautiful thing, chosen one, is that you didn't have to do anything to earn this protection. You didn't have to pray harder, fast longer, or perform some religious ritual to activate it. This covering was placed over you before you even knew you needed it, before they even thought to come for you. God saw the attack coming from 1,000 miles away. He watched them in their secret meetings, heard them in their whispered conversations, observed them as they plotted in the darkness. And instead of stopping them, instead of preventing the attack altogether, he did something far more powerful. He prepared you. He sealed you. He covered you with a protection so complete, so thorough, that their filth couldn't even get close enough to leave a smudge. This is why people are so impressed by how you handled it. This is why they keep shaking their heads in wonder, trying to figure out how you stayed so clean while walking through such a dirty situation. They're looking for a technique, a strategy, a secret method you used to deflect their attacks. But the truth is simpler and more supernatural than they could ever imagine. You were sealed in light, and darkness cannot contaminate light. You were covered in grace, and grace repels everything that isn't of God. You were wrapped in divine favor, and favor creates an atmosphere where lies lose their power and truth rises to the surface like oil on water. They threw dirt at the sun, chosen one. And just like the sun remains untouched by anything hurled at it from the earth below, you remained pure, clean, untainted by their desperate attempts to drag you down to their level. But here's the part that really broke them. Here's what made them realize they had picked a fight they could never win. Not only did the dirt not stick to you, it bounced back and covered them instead. Every lie they told about you became a mirror reflecting their own deception. Every accusation they made became a spotlight illuminating their own guilt. Every piece of filth they threw became evidence of the darkness in their own hearts. You didn't have to defend yourself because your seal was your defense. You didn't have to fight back because your covering was fighting for you. You didn't have to clear your name because heaven was already working to expose the truth. And now they're standing there, covered in the very mud they tried to throw at you, wondering how everything backfired so spectacularly. They're the ones who look dirty now. They're the ones whose reputations are questionable. They're the ones people are side-eyeing and whispering about. Because when you come against someone who's sealed by God, you don't just fail, you expose yourself in the process. This is the mystery they couldn't solve. Chosen one. This is why they keep staring at you with that mixture of awe and fear. They threw their worst at someone they thought was vulnerable, and they discovered they had attacked someone who was invincible. Not because you're perfect, not because you're superhuman, but because you're sealed. And what God has sealed, no man can unseal. What heaven has covered, earth cannot uncover. What the Almighty has protected, the enemy cannot penetrate. You are walking, breathing proof that there is a God in heaven who watches over his chosen ones. You are living evidence that divine protection is real, that spiritual covering is more powerful than any weapon formed against you. They couldn't dirty you because you belong to the one who is pure. They couldn't stain you because you're covered by the one who is spotless. They couldn't touch you because you're sealed by the one who is untouchable. The dirt didn't stick, chosen one, because you were never meant to be soiled by their hands. You were meant to shine. And shine you did, right through their storm, their assault, their coordinated attack. You shined so bright that their darkness became obvious by comparison. You remained so clean that their filthiness became impossible to ignore. And now the whole world can see the difference between someone who operates in the flesh and someone who walks in the spirit. Between someone who fights with earthly weapons and someone who's protected by heavenly armor. You didn't just survive their attack, chosen one. You revealed the powerlessness of their weapons against someone who's sealed in light. And that revelation, that's what has them so impressed. That's what has them so shook. That's what has them realizing they were never fighting against flesh and blood. They were fighting against someone the Almighty had already claimed as his own. Chapter 6. You didn't take power, you revealed you already had it. They thought power was something you had to claw for, fight for, steal in the shadows when no one was looking. They believed the only way to rise was to push others down, to scheme, manipulate, and play games that would make the devil himself take notes. But you shattered their entire understanding of what real authority looks like. You didn't take power. You didn't steal it. You didn't hustle for it or beg for it or perform tricks to earn it. You simply stood still long enough for the world to realize what had been there all along. You didn't climb the ladder God built the platform under your feet. And now they're all looking up, wondering how you got so high without ever stepping on a single soul. See, chosen one, there's a difference between borrowed power and divine authority. Borrowed power needs constant maintenance. It requires you to keep proving yourself, keep fighting to hold your position, keep playing politics and kissing rings just to stay relevant. But divine authority doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need a microphone. It doesn't need validation from the crowd because it comes with its own confirmation from heaven itself. That's what they couldn't understand about you. While they were busy networking, name-dropping, and cutting deals in back rooms, you were just being consistent, truthful, real. You weren't performing for anyone because you weren't seeking approval from anyone. And that quiet confidence, that unshakable peace in your own skin, it started making people nervous. Not because you were threatening them, but because your very existence was threatening their belief system about how power works. They expected you to play the game. They waited for you to compromise, to sell a piece of your soul for a seat at their table. They watched for the moment when you would finally bend the knee, lower your standards, or water yourself down just to fit into their version of success. But that moment never came, and the longer you stood in your truth, the more their whole system started looking fragile. You became dangerous without even trying. Not because you were aggressive or loud or demanding, but because you were undeniably authentic in a world built on facades. Your integrity made their masks feel heavy. Your consistency made their performance look exhausting. Your peace made their chaos look unnecessary. And then, something beautiful and terrifying happened. People started noticing. Not just the ones who already loved you, but the ones who had dismissed you, overlooked you, even mocked you for being too nice or too soft for their world. They started paying attention to your words, started watching how you moved, started quoting the very wisdom they once laughed at. The same voices that used to whisper about your weakness are now echoing your strength. The same people who thought your kindness was naive are now hungry for the peace you carry. They're not just impressed by how you handled that disgusting situation, they're mystified by it. Because you didn't just survive it, you transcended it. And in transcending it, you revealed something they never expected to see. Real power doesn't have to announce itself. It doesn't have to prove itself. It doesn't have to fight for recognition because recognition finds it. Real power is magnetic, not aggressive. It draws people in rather than pushing them down. And you, chosen one, you've been carrying that kind of power all along. You just didn't know the world was finally ready to see it. They thought they were watching you climb, But you weren't climbing anything. You were simply standing still while the ground beneath everyone else shifted. You weren't reaching for elevation. Elevation was reaching for you. The very people who once looked down on you are now looking up, not because you rose above them, but because they finally realized you had been above them all along. Your authority doesn't come from a title on a door or a number in a bank account. It doesn't come from who you know or what you own. Your authority comes from something deeper, something ancient, something that was placed inside you before you took your first breath. It's the authority of someone who knows who they are and whose they are. And that kind of knowing, that can't be faked, bought, or borrowed. This is why their attempts to break you backfired so spectacularly. They were attacking someone they thought was weak, only to discover they were dealing with someone whose strength wasn't in their muscles or their mouth, but in their spirit. They thought they could diminish you by taking away external things, respect, opportunities, relationships. But you can't diminish someone whose source of power is internal and eternal. Now they're scrambling to understand how you did it, how you gained influence without manipulation, how you earned respect without compromise, how you built a platform without stepping on anyone to get there. They're studying your moves like you're some kind of spiritual magician, trying to reverse engineer your success so they can bottle it and sell it. But here's what they'll never understand. You can't replicate authenticity. You can't manufacture integrity. You can't fake the kind of authority that comes from walking through fire and coming out refined rather than burned. Your power isn't a strategy they can copy, it's a character they can't counterfeit. You didn't take power, chosen one. You revealed you already had it. And now the whole world is watching, learning, and finally understanding what real authority looks like when it's rooted in righteousness rather than ruthlessness. The platform you're standing on wasn't built by human hands. It was constructed by divine appointment, reinforced by tested character, and elevated by a God who knew exactly when the world would be ready to see what he had been preparing in you all along. Chapter 7. You became the judgment they never saw coming. They thought they'd escape what they did to you. They believed silence meant amnesia, that distance meant freedom, that time would wash away the stains of their betrayal. But chosen one, what they didn't understand is that judgment doesn't always come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it walks quietly into a room, wearing your face. You see, there's a courtroom in heaven that never closes. And while they were sleeping peacefully, convinced they'd gotten away with their spiritual crimes, the evidence was being compiled. Not by you. You never lifted a finger to prosecute them. The evidence was your life, your healing, your elevation, your undeniable, unshakable rise from the ashes they thought would bury you forever. Every room you walk into now carries the weight of divine verdict. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to point fingers or recite their sins. Your presence alone has become their reckoning. Because you, chosen one, you are not their revenge. You are their mirror. And they're haunted by what they see reflecting back at them. Watch their faces when you enter a space. See how their laughter gets caught in their throats. Notice how their confidence crumbles the moment you're in their peripheral vision. That's not coincidence. That's conviction. That's the sound of guilty consciences being triggered by the sight of someone they tried to destroy. Standing tall, glowing, untouchable. They thought judgment would come like a hurricane, loud and destructive. They prepared for your anger, your retaliation, your public exposure of their deeds. But God had a different plan. He made you the judgment they never saw coming. Not because you sought vengeance, but because your survival became their sentence. You see, there's something terrifying about grace when you don't deserve it. There's something unsettling about witnessing someone rise after you push them into the pit. They can't process how you're not bitter. They can't understand how you're not broken. They can't comprehend how someone who went through what you endured could still smile with genuine peace. And that confusion, that's the beginning of their torment. Your healing haunts them. Your progress tortures them. Your joy. It's a daily reminder that everything they said about you, Everything they predicted would happen to you. Every curse they whispered behind closed doors, all of it, was powerless against the divine covering over your life. They're learning the hard way that when you touch someone anointed, the consequences don't come immediately. They marinate. They compound. They wait for the perfect moment to manifest. And now, watching you thrive while they stagnate, watching you blessed while they struggle, watching you free while they remain trapped in the same cycles they've always known, that's not luck. Chosen one. That's divine mathematics. You became living proof that their assessment of you was wrong, dead wrong. They said you wouldn't make it without them. You flourished. They said you were too weak to stand alone. You became unshakable. They said you'd never recover from what they put you through. You didn't just recover, you transformed. And now every success you achieve, every door that opens for you, every blessing that falls into your lap becomes another piece of evidence in the cosmic case against them. You're not trying to prove anything. You're just living. But your life has become their daily conviction notice. Here's what they're really afraid of. It's not that you might expose them. It's that you don't need to. Truth has a way of exposing itself. Lies have expiration dates. And the same universe that allowed them to hurt you is now orchestrating your vindication with precision they never anticipated. They watch you from a distance now, wondering how someone they discarded could be so content, how someone they betrayed could walk with such confidence, how someone they tried to shame could carry themselves with such dignity. And in their wondering, in their confusion, in their secret observation of your life, they're being judged by their own consciences. You didn't have to become their enemy to become their judgment. You just had to become yourself, healed, whole, and walking in purpose. That was enough to sentence them to a lifetime of wondering, what if? What if they had honored you? What if they had protected what they had with you? What if they had recognized the treasure before they threw it away? But those are questions they'll have to live with now, because you're no longer available for their regret. You're no longer reachable by their guilt. You've moved beyond their ability to impact your life in any meaningful way. And that distance, that unreachable space you now occupy, that's the most profound judgment of all. They thought they were writing your ending, but God was using their betrayal to write your beginning. They thought they were closing your doors, but heaven was preparing to open gates they didn't even know existed. They thought they were dimming your light, but they were just clearing away the shadows that kept others from seeing how bright you really shine. You became the judgment they never saw coming because you became everything they said you could never be. And now, every breath you take in freedom is a testimony to their failure. Every step you take in purpose is proof of their miscalculation. Every moment you live in peace is evidence that they were wrong about your destiny. You are not their revenge, chosen one. You are their mirror, and they're haunted by what they see. And that haunting, that daily reminder of what they lost when they lost you, that is the justice heaven designed specifically for them. Chapter 8. Your presence dismantled the lie. They thought fear would break you. It backfired. You see, chosen one, their entire campaign was built on a single strategy. Keep you silent, keep you small, keep you scrambling to defend yourself while they controlled the narrative. They needed you to stay in reactive mode, always explaining, always justifying, always begging to be believed. Because as long as you were on defense, they could stay on offense. As long as you were explaining your truth, they could keep spinning their lies. But something shifted. Something divine intervened. You stopped playing their game entirely. You didn't explain your truth. You lived it so loud, they had to shut up. That's when their whole system collapsed. Because lies, no matter how well crafted, how perfectly timed, how strategically placed, they all have one fatal weakness. They need cooperation to survive. They need people to believe them, to repeat them, to give them life through agreement and confusion. But when truth walks into the room, when authentic power shows up, when someone starts living their reality instead of defending it, lies don't just fade, they suffocate. Your presence became a spiritual audit, chosen one. Every room you entered, every conversation you joined, every space you occupied with your quiet confidence started exposing the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. You weren't trying to prove anything. You weren't performing. You were just being authentically, unapologetically you. And that authenticity became a mirror they couldn't avoid looking into. See, they had painted a picture of you. Weak, desperate, broken. Someone who needed their validation, their permission, their approval to feel worthy. They created an entire narrative around your supposed failures, your alleged mistakes, your imagined shortcomings. And for a while, people bought it. Not because it was true, but because it was loud. Not because it made sense, but because it was repeated. Not because it had evidence, but because it had energy behind it. But energy without truth is just noise. And eventually, noise gets exhausting. You became the living contradiction to their story. Every step you took in confidence made their claims look foolish. Every boundary you set with grace made their accusations seem petty. Every victory you achieved in silence made their slander sound like jealousy. You didn't have to argue with their lies. Your life argued for you. This is what they never anticipated. Chosen one. They thought destruction was louder than construction. They believed gossip traveled faster than growth. They assumed people would rather believe drama than witness dignity. But they underestimated something powerful. Truth has its own frequency. And when that frequency starts playing, everything tuned to falsehood begins to sound off-key. Your glow started speaking louder than their gossip. People began to notice the disconnect. Here they were, spending all this energy trying to tear you down, and there you were, building something beautiful. Here they were, obsessing over your past, and there you were, creating your future. Here they were, talking about who you used to be, and there you were, becoming who you were always meant to be. The contrast became undeniable. While they were stuck in yesterday's drama, you were walking in today's breakthrough. While they were rehearsing old wounds, you were writing new victories. While they were performance protesting your character, you were living it out in real time. And that's when the whispers started. Not the malicious kind they had been spreading, but the wondering kind, the questioning kind, the wait a minute kind. People started asking themselves, if this person is really as broken as they say, why does their life look so whole? If they're really as weak as they claim, why does their strength feel so genuine? If they're really as lost as they insist, why does their direction seem so clear? Your presence dismantled the lie simply by existing in truth. You didn't hold press conferences. You didn't launch counter campaigns. You didn't gather witnesses or collect evidence or build a defense team. You just kept growing. You just kept glowing. You just kept going. And with every step forward, their story about you took a step backward into irrelevance. This is the power of authentic living, chosen one, when you stop trying to convince people and start showing them. When you stop explaining your worth and start demonstrating it. When you stop defending your character and start embodying it. Lies lose their power over you, not because you defeated them in battle, but because you outgrew them in truth. They thought they could define you by your worst moments, but you redefined yourself through your best choices. They thought they could trap you in their version of your story, but you wrote a new chapter they never saw coming. They thought they could make you smaller through their words, but you made yourself larger through your actions. Your silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Your peace wasn't passivity. It was power. Your growth wasn't luck. It was liberation. And now, chosen one, watch what happens to lies when they're left alone with truth. Watch what happens to gossip when it has to compete with glory. Watch what happens to their narrative when your reality starts speaking louder than their rumors. The lie didn't just expire. It imploded under the weight of your authenticity. And everyone who invested in it, everyone who repeated it, Everyone who built their comfort on your supposed downfall, they're left holding stock in a company that just went bankrupt. You didn't have to destroy the lie, chosen one. You just had to outlive it. And you did. You're still here. You're still rising. You're still writing your story in a language they never learned to speak. Truth. And that truth, it's not just setting you free. It's setting the record straight in ways their words never could. Your presence became the proof. Your life became the light. Your truth became the testimony that made their lie impossible to believe. This is what divine vindication looks like. Not loud, not angry, not desperate, just undeniably, authentically, powerfully real. Conclusion. Chosen one, as we reach the end of this divine revelation, I want you to remember something that will anchor your soul in the storms ahead. Your composure in that disgusting situation wasn't just impressive to people, it was a demonstration of heaven's power flowing through earthly vessels. You didn't just handle a crisis, you showcased the character of Christ in a world that had forgotten what true strength looks like. Remember this, when they tried to break you, God was building you. When they sought to shame you, heaven was showcasing you. When they plotted your downfall, the Almighty was planning your elevation. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was warfare on a spiritual level they couldn't comprehend. Your restraint wasn't retreat, it was the discipline of a seasoned soldier who knows that not every battle requires your voice, but every victory requires your faith. You are not walking this journey alone, beloved. The same God who gave you supernatural composure in your darkest hour is still moving in your life today. He's still opening doors that no man can shut. He's still making ways where there seems to be no way. And there's a community of believers, your spiritual family, who understand your struggle because they've walked similar paths. We're here, praying with you, believing for you, and standing as witnesses to the miraculous work God is doing in your life. But let me ask you this question, and I want you to really sit with it. If God trusted you with that level of spiritual warfare, if He equipped you to handle that disgusting situation with such grace that even your enemies are impressed, what else is He preparing you for? What greater assignment is on the horizon? What doors of influence is He about to open because you proved faithful in the fire? Now, before you leave this sacred space we've shared together, I want to pray over you. Not just as a teacher or a messenger, but as someone who understands the weight you've been carrying, the battles you've been fighting, and the victory that's already written in your name. A prayer for the chosen ones. Father God, I place my hand upon the heart of every chosen one watching this message. Lord, you see them, not just their triumph, but their tears. Not just their strength, but their struggle. You know the cost of that composure they displayed. You know the nights they cried alone, the moments they almost broke, the times they questioned if they had the strength to continue. But God, you also know their destiny. You know the assignments waiting for them. You know the breakthroughs on the horizon. So right now, I ask you to breathe fresh strength into their weary souls. Pour new oil into their spiritual lamps. Remind them that they are not forgotten, not forsaken, not fighting alone. Open doors of opportunity that showcase their character. Connect them with people who will appreciate their integrity. Elevate them to positions where their past pain becomes their platform for ministry. Let their story become a beacon of hope for others walking through similar valleys. Heal every wounded place in their hearts. Restore every stolen blessing. Return every good thing that was taken from them sevenfold. And God, give them such peace-deep, unshakable peace that even in future storms, they'll remember this moment and know that you are with them. In the mighty name of Jesus, we declare that their best days are not behind them, they're ahead of them. Their greatest victories are not in their past, they're in their future. And their story is not ending in defeat, it's being written in divine triumph. Amen and amen. Beloved family, if this message stirred something in your spirit, don't let this moment pass in silence. Drop a comment below and share your heart. Tell us about your breakthrough, your struggle, or simply that you're here and you're believing for God's best in your life. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you know someone who's walking through their own disgusting situation right now, someone who needs to hear that their composure is noticed, their strength is supernatural, and their victory is guaranteed, please share this message with them. Sometimes God uses us to carry His words to the exact person who needs them most. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for trusting me with your time, your attention, and your heart. If this ministry has blessed you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. Not because I need the numbers, but because there are more chosen ones out there who need these messages, and your subscription helps us reach them. Remember, chosen one, you didn't just survive that situation, you conquered it. And the same power that carried you through that valley is the same power that's going to elevate you to your mountaintop. Until we meet again in this sacred space, keep walking in your authority, keep standing in your truth, and keep trusting in your God. You are chosen, you are covered, you are cherished. Go in peace, knowing that your greatest chapter is still being written. Amen.